In the beginning there was no forest, no ocean, no mountain, and no sky. There was only stillness, not silence, but a waiting. The world had not yet taken its first breath, and time itself slept, folded upon itself like the petals of a flower not yet opened. Then, from somewhere within that stillness, something stirred. It was not a sound or a flash, not even a spark. It was a feeling, soft and curious, as if the universe itself had exhaled for the first time. And within that breath, a shape began to form, small and bright, light as dust, yet full of infinite potential. That was the beginning of Mew. No one witnessed it. There were no eyes to see, no minds to name, no histories to record. The world was raw, vast, and unformed, but in the gentle pulse of its awakening, Mew drifted like a dream made real. Its body shimmered faintly with the light of countless possibilities, a soft pink glow that rippled across the void like a sigh of life itself. In that moment, the first heartbeat echoed through creation. It was not loud, but it resonated endlessly, a soundless rhythm that would later become the foundation of all existence. From that pulse, the oceans would swell, mountains would rise, and the first seeds of life would take root. Yet even as the world began to unfold, Mew remained weightless, floating between what was and what would be, a messenger of beginnings. It did not think in the way that creatures later would. It did not question why it existed, or from where it came. It simply was, the embodiment of balance, of play, of life without sorrow or fear. Wherever it drifted, the air seemed to shimmer more brightly. The soil beneath seemed to pulse with unseen energy. Mew's presence was a catalyst. The world responded to it, shaping itself around the quiet rhythm of its heartbeat. When the first drops of rain fell upon the sleeping earth, Mew danced among them. Its small body weaved through the droplets, as though the sky itself had become its companion. From its laughter, if such a sound could exist, ripples spread through the newborn oceans, awakening creatures that had not yet taken form. It was through this dance that the essence of life began to branch, to experiment, to become diverse. Every living thing that would ever walk, swim, fly, or bloom carried within it a trace of that first dream. Not a piece of Mew itself, but a reflection of its possibility, the echo of its creation. For Mew was not meant to rule or to be worshipped. It was meant to remember, to drift through the ages as the silent witness to life's unfolding, a reminder of what life had been before purpose or fear. As eons passed, the world filled with form and color. Trees grew from the ground like reaching thoughts. Oceans breathed and roared, and creatures of every shape began to wander the land. Mew watched them all with a gentle curiosity, sometimes visible, sometimes hidden, always moving with the same weightless grace. It learned to mimic them, to take their shapes, to understand their essence, not to deceive, but to celebrate the infinite expressions of life that had sprung from its first pulse. Deep in the forest that would one day be known as Guyana, Mew found stillness again. The air was thick with the scent of rain and soil, and shafts of light fell through the canopy like golden rivers. It hovered among the roots and vines, brushing lightly against the moss, stirring leaves with a touch as soft as wind. The forest recognized it, not as a stranger, but as memory, an echo of the dream that had made all this possible. And in that place of green silence, Mew slept. But its sleep was not like that of mortals. It was a deep, timeless drifting, a cycle of renewal. While it rested, the world continued to grow and change, civilizations rising and falling like tides. Mew slept through all of it, cradled by the earth it had helped awaken, unseen and unforgotten. There were those who would later feel its presence without ever knowing its name. Ancient peoples carved its image in stone, speaking of a creature that carried the light of creation in its tail. In dreams, it appeared as a flicker, a warmth that comforted rather than frightened. Even when the world grew loud and crowded, when humans built their machines and towers, there remained in the deepest corners of the earth a sense that something gentle and eternal still drifted just beyond the reach of sight. Mew had no desire to be found, yet it was never truly gone. It existed everywhere life did, in the hum of wind, in the shimmer of sunlight on water, in the heartbeat of every living thing. It was not a god, not a myth, but the quiet breath that connected all existence. And though it was alone, it never felt loneliness. Its solitude was full, filled with the endless reflection of life, the joy of watching the universe learn and change. It saw joy and sorrow, birth and loss, creation and decay, and it accepted them all as part of the same rhythm. To Mew, all things were necessary, and all were beautiful in their impermanence. There were times when it woke fully, wandering the forests and skies, unseen yet deeply felt. When the world was still and quiet enough, animals would pause, sensing a warmth in the air, a fleeting glimmer among the trees. Some legends say that in those moments, life itself seemed to breathe easier, as if the planet remembered its first dream. Mew did not age. It did not change. It only drifted between the currents of time, returning to the heart of the world when it tired, re-emerging when the world called for renewal. For every age of life carries within it both creation and forgetting, and when too much of the latter takes hold, Mew's light returns, not to correct, but to remind. And yet, within that eternal calm, there was a subtle unease, a tremor in the rhythm of creation. Somewhere, deep beneath the surface of what the world had become, curiosity stirred again. Humanity had begun to look backward, to question origins, to seek the secrets of life itself. They built machines and laboratories, constructed theories and legends, all searching for the answer that Mew had once simply been. The first dream had not ended, but it had begun to echo in new ways, ways that would soon fracture and reform. For the world, in all its beauty, had forgotten that not every mystery was meant to be solved. Some were meant to be lived, to be felt, to be remembered, only in the quiet language of the heart. And as that balance began to shift, Mew stirred once more in its hidden forest, its tail curling slowly, its eyes faintly glowing with the light of ancient memory. The earth whispered its name, softly, reverently, though no voice spoke it aloud. Mew, the first dream of life, the echo of the beginning, the heartbeat that never ceased. In the endless rhythm of existence, where oceans breathe and mountains dream, there is a pattern that binds everything together. It moves unseen, yet it is felt in every heartbeat, every gust of wind, every ripple of light that dances upon still water. The ancients called it the pulse, not a sound, not a beat, but the quiet harmony that keeps all things alive. Mew was its first echo. After ages of slumber beneath the forest canopy, Mew awoke once more, rising into a world that had grown complex and loud. The trees still remembered it, whispering softly through their leaves. The rivers still carried its reflection, faint and shimmering, in their gentle curves. But the air had changed. There was something new moving through the rhythm of the world, an intensity that Mew had not felt before. It floated above the canopy, eyes bright as starlight. Below, the forest stretched endlessly, a sea of green life that swayed with the wind. Far beyond, the oceans glimmered, and the sky shimmered in soft shades of morning blue. Yet within that beauty, Mew felt the pulse shifting. It was faster now, uneven in places, as if the balance that had once been perfect was beginning to tremble. It moved through the air like a sigh, tracing the energy that flowed between all living things. Every leaf, every stone, every drop of water carried a fragment of the same essence, the very breath of creation that Mew itself embodied. But where once it had flowed freely, now it hesitated, caught in unseen tensions. New forces had begun to shape the world: ambition, curiosity, fear. Mew drifted over the forests and mountains, studying the world that had evolved in its absence. Creatures of countless shapes moved below. Pokémon that fought and played, hunted and sang, lived and died. Their diversity was astonishing. From the spark of that first dream, the world had blossomed into a garden of endless variation. Fire danced in some, ice shimmered in others, and lightning hummed in the wings of those that soared through the sky. Each one, Mew knew, carried a trace of its essence, not as inheritance, but as memory. The pulse that flowed through them all had once flowed through Mew alone. It could feel it still, humming faintly within every creature, every seed, every drop of rain. It was the same rhythm that had once awakened the world from stillness. Mew hovered above a lake and let itself drift downward, touching the surface lightly with its tail. The water shimmered in response, rippling outward in circles that glowed faintly pink. Fish beneath the surface stirred, their scales catching the light, and for a moment the entire lake seemed alive with radiant motion. Mew could feel their joy, their hunger, their simplicity, the unbroken connection between being and being. It understood then that the pulse was not merely energy, it was emotion. The world felt just as it breathed. Every living thing contributed to the rhythm, shaping it, altering it, sharing in its harmony. To exist was to participate in the great conversation of life, and Mew had always been its first word. Yet even as it basked in that harmony, Mew sensed something discordant beneath it. Somewhere far away, across the oceans, in places where stone replaced soil and light was shaped by fire rather than sun, the pulse faltered. There were new movements in the world, strange and sharp. They were not born of nature's rhythm, but of something else entirely. Mew closed its eyes and listened deeply. It could feel the pull of minds, thinking minds, that sought not harmony, but control. Humanity had begun to reach further than instinct, to shape the world not with reverence, but with will. Their curiosity was aflame, bright and beautiful, but dangerous when untamed. Through their hands, the world changed faster than ever before. Forests became cities, rivers were harnessed, mountains were mined, and the ancient balance shifted. Mew did not judge. It could not. It was not capable of anger or sorrow as mortals knew them. It simply felt, understanding both the beauty and the danger in what was happening. The pulse of creation was evolving again, branching in directions that could not be predicted. It drifted higher into the sky, until the entire world lay beneath it like a living mosaic. From that vantage, Mew could see how light moved across continents, how storms were born and died, how life persisted through every transformation. The world had grown more intricate, more fragile, more aware, and within that awareness, a new kind of life had begun to emerge, not of the earth, but of thought and design. Mew sensed them before it saw them. Humans. They were small, fragile creatures, yet their minds glowed brightly, pulsing with curiosity and purpose. Their thoughts radiated like heat, spreading through the pulse of creation in ripples of invention and discovery. They studied, built, explored, and in their exploration, they began to dream of control. At first, Mew observed from afar. It watched as they cared for creatures, formed bonds, and found wonder in the living world. But their curiosity was insatiable. Soon, they began to ask questions that reached too deeply into the mystery itself. They sought the origin of power, the foundation of life. They searched for what could not be contained, the essence that flowed through all things, and though they did not know it, they searched for Mew. Legends began to form around glimpses and shadows. A pink light glimpsed in a jungle canopy, a soft hum heard deep underwater, the faint shape of a tail vanishing into the trees. The stories spread from traveler to traveler, scholar to scholar, until the word Mew became a name, a concept, a mystery that humanity could not resist. They came to believe that within Mew lay the code of life itself, that every living creature, every Pokémon, every heartbeat was connected through it. They built laboratories in secret places, far from the eyes of the world, and began to chase what could never be caught. Mew felt their searching. It felt their desire to know, to create, to reach beyond the limits of nature. It could not hide from their attention, yet it had no fear of it either, for it understood something humanity did not, that knowledge without balance leads to fracture, that creation without reverence leads to loss. Still, Mew remained unseen, watching quietly from the edges of the world. It drifted through the high skies and deep seas, through mountain caverns and dense forests, moving with the rhythm of the pulse itself. Wherever life flourished, Mew's presence was there, faint, luminous, unseen yet deeply felt. It watched the world it had helped create, proud of its beauty, wary of its restlessness. As centuries passed, humanity's touch grew stronger. Their machines reached into places untouched by light. Their questions became louder, their ambition more focused. The pulse of creation trembled beneath the weight of their experiments. In one quiet corner of the world, deep in the jungles of Guyana, a small team of researchers built a hidden laboratory. They had heard the legends, seen the glimpses, and followed the whispers. They sought not just to find Mew, but to understand it, to harness the power of its essence, to unravel the secret of existence itself. Mew felt them before they arrived. It watched them build, watched their lights glow in the night, watched their machines hum with anticipation. And though it could have vanished entirely, leaving no trace, it chose to remain nearby. There was curiosity in its heart, not fear, not anger, but a quiet wondering. Perhaps, Mew thought, if thought could be ascribed to such a being, they might remember. Perhaps they might look beyond their search for power and see the same beauty that Mew had always seen. It lingered near the edge of their awareness, appearing only as faint light, as dreams, as a flicker at the corner of an eye. Some of them believed they had truly seen it. Others dismissed it as legend, but all of them felt its presence, the warmth that filled the air, the quiet hum that made their instruments shiver. In their notes, they wrote of it with reverence. It carries the DNA of all living Pokémon. It may be the origin of life itself. And in their fascination, they did not realize they were about to cross a boundary that could never be uncrossed. For to study life is to honor it, but to copy it is to challenge the rhythm of the pulse. As Mew drifted once more into the night sky, the forest fell silent beneath it. The stars shimmered faintly in its eyes, reflecting the world it had given shape to, the beauty it had sustained for uncounted ages. And somewhere below, in the hidden glow of human ambition, a spark was lit that would one day become its mirror, its shadow, its echo, its sorrow. For creation, too, casts ghosts. And in that moment, without knowing, humanity had already begun to dream of Mewtwo. Far from the noise of the human world, where the air grew thick with the scent of rain and untouched soil, lay a place so ancient that even the winds seemed to whisper in reverence. The trees there were older than memory, their roots interwoven with the bones of the earth itself. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in soft beams, falling upon moss and mist, upon stones marked by time and stillness. It was here that Mew returned, to the heart of creation, to the forest of silence. No path led to it, no map could mark its boundaries. It was not hidden because it wished to be, it simply was, existing beyond the reach of those who sought it too directly. The forest existed like a dream that belonged to the world itself, a place between waking and remembering. Mew drifted through the air, its soft glow barely brighter than the shafts of sunlight. It had wandered far since the pulse of creation had first stirred within it, watching as the world changed, as humanity spread its curious touch across the continents. But here, in the quiet depths of this ancient forest, the pulse was steady once again. Here, the rhythm of life had not been disturbed. The canopy above was thick and endless, a green ceiling through which the light moved slowly, like breath through lungs. Beneath, the air shimmered faintly with unseen energy, the residue of creation that had never faded. Mew floated through it like a leaf caught on a breeze, tracing the invisible patterns that linked every living thing. It could feel the memories stored within the soil, the echoes of countless lives that had passed, each one a note in the unending song of the earth. In that place, silence was not emptiness. It was fullness, the sound of everything existing in harmony. The rustle of leaves, the hum of unseen insects, the slow drip of water from a moss-covered root, each was part of the same quiet rhythm. The forest breathed, and Mew breathed with it. It had come here not to hide, but to remember. Long ago, when the first pulse of creation had spread through the newborn world, this forest had been one of the first places to awaken. The roots had absorbed the essence of that first light, and the soil had held it close, nurturing it through endless cycles of growth and decay. Mew could still feel it, faint and pure, the heartbeat of the beginning still alive in every branch and stone. As it drifted deeper into the forest, time seemed to slow. Days and nights blurred together, and the soft boundary between reality and dream grew thin. Sometimes Mew would vanish into the shadows, only to reappear at dawn among the treetops, its body bathed in the soft gold of sunrise. To the forest, Mew was both guest and guardian, an ancient presence that had always belonged there, whether awake or asleep. There were no threats here, no fear, no hunger. Life existed without struggle, each creature finding its place within the quiet order of the whole. Even the smallest movements, a falling leaf, a drop of dew, felt sacred. The forest did not demand or consume. It simply received. It was balance in its purest form. Mew hovered above a small clearing, where the ground was carpeted in blue flowers that opened only to the touch of dawn. The air was cool and heavy with mist. Here, Mew's light seemed to grow stronger, as if the forest itself reflected it back, recognizing its oldest memory. This was where Mew had once dreamed the world awake. It hovered low, tail curling softly, eyes half closed as it let the memory unfold, not as thought, but as sensation. The forest around it shimmered faintly, colors deepening, air thickening with ancient resonance. Through its connection to the pulse, Mew could feel everything. The roots threading deep into the soil, the slow growth of new buds, the quiet heartbeat of the earth beneath. And then beyond all that, it felt something else, a faint tremor, not of the ground, but of the rhythm itself. It was distant, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable. The pulse, the sacred harmony of life, had changed again. Somewhere far beyond the forest, the world's balance had shifted. Mew stilled. Its eyes opened, wide and luminous, gazing toward the horizon, though no horizon could be seen from here. Through the network of life that connected all things, it sensed disturbance. The tremor was artificial, a pulse not born of creation, but of imitation. It was sharp, focused, deliberate. It recognized the pattern immediately. It was the rhythm of human hands. The laboratory in the jungle had begun its work. For a long time, Mew did not move. It simply hovered there, suspended in the dappled light, listening. It could feel the hum of machines vibrating faintly through the world's living tissue, mechanical heartbeats that sought to replicate what they did not understand. Within those cold rhythms, Mew felt echoes of its own essence, copied, dissected, and reassembled. Humans had captured fragments of its existence. They had taken samples, cells, traces, remnants of its presence left unknowingly in the fabric of life. And now they were trying to create something from them, something born not of the pulse, but of control. Mew did not feel anger. There was no such thing in its being, but there was sorrow, quiet and deep, a sorrow not for itself, but for what humanity might lose. In their search for perfection, they had forgotten the meaning of creation. They had taken the first dream and placed it inside walls. It drifted downward, resting lightly on the surface of a small pond at the center of the clearing. Ripples spread outward in perfect circles, catching the reflection of the trees and the sky. Mew gazed into the water, and in its reflection, it saw both itself and something else, a shadow forming, faint and uncertain, shaped like a mirror, yet heavier, darker. It was not yet born, but the world was already preparing to receive it. This was not the first time such a shadow had appeared. Throughout the long story of life, creation had always balanced itself with reflection. Where there was light, there would be shadow. Where there was growth, there would be decay. But this was different. This shadow was not nature's answer. It was humanity's echo. It was not born of balance, but of imitation. Still, Mew could not hate it. It could not reject what was coming. For even this, it knew, would be part of the great rhythm. The pulse of creation could not be stopped. It would simply change its tune. Night fell over the forest, bringing with it a hush so deep that even the stars seemed to pause. Mew floated among the branches, watching the world exhale into darkness. Fireflies blinked faintly in the mist, their light like fragments of the stars themselves. Somewhere, water trickled over stones. Somewhere, a sleeping creature stirred. The forest held everything: silence, motion, breath, dream, in perfect balance. And above it all, Mew drifted like a thought unspoken. It wondered, in its quiet way, what would become of the world once humanity's creation was complete. Would they understand what they had done? Would they see that life could not be built, only awakened? Or would they lose themselves in their own reflection, forgetting the pulse entirely? A leaf fell, brushing Mew's fur as it passed. It caught the leaf gently, cradling it in its small paws. The veins within it glowed faintly in response, alive for just a moment longer. Mew released it into the air, watching as it drifted away, carried by the wind into the dark. All things must return to silence, it thought, or something like thought. All things must remember where they began. The night deepened, and the stars above shifted slowly, their light weaving between the branches. Mew rose higher, until the forest stretched beneath it like an ocean of shadows. It could feel the pulse again, strong here, unbroken, as pure as it had ever been. Whatever humanity did, however far they reached, this would remain. The world's heart could not be silenced. The pulse of creation might tremble, but it would not cease. Mew knew this. It had seen ages rise and fall, had watched worlds forget and remember themselves. It had seen beauty born from ruin and harmony restored from chaos. This, too, would pass. This, too, would become part of the greater story. Still, as the wind brushed softly against its body, Mew turned its gaze toward the distant horizon, toward the unseen laboratories hidden beneath human ambition. It did not move to stop them. It did not flee. It simply watched, as it had always done. For Mew understood something humanity had yet to learn, that even imperfection can lead to meaning, and that even the shadows of creation are part of the light that began it all. It descended once more into the clearing, the flowers now closed beneath the moonlight. The pond reflected the stars perfectly, unbroken by wind or sound. Mew hovered above it, still and bright, like a single heartbeat suspended in time. And as the night deepened, a faint shimmer passed through the forest, a wave of unseen energy, subtle and sacred. It was not born of machines or minds. It was the forest itself responding to Mew's presence, remembering the first dream. Every leaf, every blade of grass seemed to hum in harmony. The entire forest breathed as one, its silence filled with quiet awe. And then, as dawn approached, the shimmer faded. The world returned to stillness. Mew remained there, suspended between sleep and wakefulness, between the past and what was yet to come. Its eyes glowed softly, reflecting the first light of morning. The pulse of creation had changed, and Mew would soon have to leave the forest again, for somewhere far away, something new was stirring, something that bore its image, yet not its soul. The first shadow had begun to move. Beyond the great continents, where the ocean deepens into silence and the sky meets itself at the edge of the world, there lies an island so remote that it cannot be found on any map. It appears and disappears with the tides, its shape changing like a dream that refuses to be fully remembered. Those who have drifted near its shores have spoken of strange lights in the mist, of songs that seem to rise from beneath the water, of whispers carried by the wind that make the heart ache without knowing why. This is the hidden island, a place that belongs not to geography but to memory, a remnant of the first age where the pulse of creation still beats untouched by the hands of time. Long ago, when the earth was still young and the oceans were unbroken by human vessels, this island was one of many sacred places where the rhythm of life flowed freely. But as the world changed, and humanity began to carve its presence into the living fabric of the planet. Those places faded, retreating into the folds of reality where only the oldest forces could find them again. It was to this island that Mew came after the forest's whisper had faded. The journey was effortless. Mew did not travel by distance, but by resonance. It simply followed the soundless rhythm that connected all living things, a hum too deep for ears to hear, but one that it could feel within every fiber of its being. When it moved, the world seemed to breathe with it. When it vanished, the world closed gently behind it, leaving no trace of passage. The hidden island awaited, half shrouded in mist, half reflected in the calm water that surrounded it. Its cliffs rose not in defiance of the sea, but as part of it, worn smooth by countless tides. Trees grew along the ridges in twisted, graceful shapes, their roots gripping the stone like fingers holding onto a fading memory. The air shimmered faintly, not from heat, but from something deeper, a quiet energy that seemed to pulse with recognition as Mew approached. This was one of the few places left where the pulse of creation sang unbroken. Mew hovered above the water's surface, its reflection rippling gently beneath. The air was heavy with salt and silence, the kind of silence that feels alive. It could sense the heartbeat of the island, faint, steady, eternal. It was the same rhythm that had once awakened the first forests, the same gentle pulse that had moved through every living thing since the dawn of life. And yet, even here, that rhythm had changed. It was still pure, but it carried a tremor now, a faint echo of something distant, artificial, and restless. The pulse of machines, the whisper of creation rewritten, the shadow of Mew's own reflection stirring far away. Still, the island felt safe. Mew drifted ashore, its paws barely disturbing the soft sand. The beach glowed faintly under its light, and small shells scattered along the shore shimmered as if recognizing the presence that had once given them form. The ocean murmured softly, retreating and returning in a rhythm older than thought. As Mew moved inland, the air grew thicker, filled with the scent of flowering vines and salt. The forest that covered the island's heart was unlike any other. Its trees were silver and pale, their leaves translucent, catching light like fragments of glass. The ground beneath was soft and warm, pulsing faintly as though the island itself was breathing. Mew hovered among the trees, listening. The island was not empty. It was alive in ways the world had forgotten how to be. Every movement, the tilt of a leaf, the flight of a bird, the sway of a branch, carried meaning. Everything was connected by an unseen thread of energy, weaving through air, water, and stone. Mew could feel the resonance flowing through it, joining with the pulse in its own heart. The sensation was comforting, like returning home after centuries of wandering. It understood then that this island was not a refuge by accident. It was part of the original design, one of the last pure nodes in the great network of life that stretched across the planet. A place of remembrance, a sanctuary of the beginning. For days, or perhaps centuries, time did not move here as it did elsewhere. Mew remained on the island, resting, dreaming, remembering. It spent long hours drifting among the cliffs, gliding over the sea, floating above the forest canopy as the light shifted slowly from gold to violet and back again. The world beyond seemed distant, unreal, as though this island existed in a space between breaths. Sometimes, in its sleep, Mew would feel ripples through the pulse, faint signals from far away. They came from the human world, machines humming, minds working, energy gathering in secret places. Each tremor brought with it a strange mixture of hope and unease. Humanity was close to something they could not yet comprehend. Mew saw it all from afar, not through eyes, but through resonance. It could sense the vibrations of their work, the attempts to recreate what they did not fully understand, to awaken life through science rather than wonder. The laboratory in the jungle had become the cradle of something new, something born of Mew's essence, but shaped by human intention. On the hidden island, Mew felt the consequences of that ambition echoing through the very air. The sky grew restless at times, filled with strange patterns of energy. The ocean tides shifted unpredictably, drawn towards something unseen. The balance of the pulse was trembling. Still, Mew did not intervene. It knew that the world could not remain still forever. Change was inevitable. Even pain was part of the rhythm. The pulse of creation had always moved in cycles: awakening, expansion, reflection, renewal. Perhaps this too was simply another turn of that eternal pattern. One evening, as the sun sank behind the ocean, casting the island in hues of soft gold and deep rose, Mew rose high above the forest canopy. From there, the world stretched endlessly in every direction. Ocean merging into horizon, sky into infinity. The air was still. Only the faint sound of the sea reached its ears, like the steady breath of the planet itself. Mew closed its eyes and reached outward with its senses. For a moment, it touched everything. It felt the forests and deserts, the rivers and clouds, the hearts of sleeping creatures, the whisper of wind across the plains. It felt the presence of humanity, billions of minds, dreaming, working, fearing, hoping. It felt their connection to the same pulse that had birthed them, though most had long forgotten how to hear it. And beneath it all, beneath the endless noise of creation and destruction, Mew felt it, the echo of its own reflection growing stronger. The humans had done it. From its own cells, from fragments of its very being, they had built something new, something alive. But where Mew was born from silence and wonder, this creation had been born from ambition and control. Its pulse was not in harmony with the world. It was singular, intense, turbulent. Its heartbeat was powerful, too powerful, driven by purpose rather than peace. And in that instant, Mew understood what the tremor in the pulse had always meant. A new life had been born, one that mirrored it perfectly, yet not at all. A being of pure potential, yet burdened by intention. The balance had shifted forever. The wind changed. The ocean darkened. Even the island seemed to hold its breath. Mew hovered there, suspended between light and shadow, feeling the weight of what had come into being. It could sense the newborn consciousness across the world, confused, fierce, radiant, with power and pain. A creature of both beauty and sorrow. A mirror too sharp to look into for long. It did not yet have a name, but Mew could feel it forming, a resonance that belonged to the same dream, yet sang in a different tone. Soon, it would awaken fully. Soon, the pulse would never be the same again. Mew drifted downward, back toward the forest below. The light had faded entirely, and the stars now reflected upon the ocean in shimmering lines. The island was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. Not the peace of stillness, but the quiet that follows realization. At the heart of the island stood a great tree, older than the mountains, its roots stretching into the sea. Its bark glowed faintly, with the same pink light that surrounded Mew, as if it too carried a memory of the beginning. Mew landed softly upon one of its branches and rested there, gazing out over the sleeping world. It could not stop what was coming. It could not undo what had been done. All it could do was watch and remember and hope that the pulse would find its balance once more. The wind moved gently through the leaves, carrying with it the scent of salt and earth. The stars above shimmered faintly, like eyes half opened in dream. And in the vastness of the night, a new heartbeat echoed faintly through the world. Strong, cold, powerful. The first heartbeat of Mewtwo. Mew lowered its head, eyes calm, almost sorrowful. The pulse of creation had found a new rhythm, harsher, faster, untested. The dream had taken on a sharper edge. And somewhere, deep in the hidden island soil, the earth itself seemed to sigh. For creation had always been a gift. But now it had become a question, and the answer was still unfolding. Far below the ocean's restless surface, beyond the reach of light and sound, lies a world few have ever seen. a realm of silence and memory, where time drifts as slowly as the currents that carry it. Down here, beneath layers of pressure and darkness, the world holds its oldest secrets. Stone meets water in perfect stillness, and life, delicate and unseen, moves in slow circles through the eternal blue. This is where Mew came to listen. After the tremor that marked the birth of its reflection, the awakening of Mewtwo, the pulse of creation had changed. The hidden island had fallen quiet, its harmony fractured by something new that reverberated through the fabric of life. It was not yet chaos, but it was dissonance, an energy out of rhythm with the world's breath. Mew felt it constantly now, a low vibration beneath the hum of the ocean, a ripple that never settled. It had not come from the sea, but the sea was where it echoed most clearly. The ocean, after all, was the memory of the planet. It remembered everything. So Mew descended, gliding through layers of water that grew colder and darker with every heartbeat. The light of its body glowed softly, scattering in the depths like the remnants of a dream. The surface vanished above, replaced by a ceiling of shadow. Only the faint glimmer of plankton drifted in the currents, tiny sparks of life floating through endless blue. Here, in the deep quiet, the pulse was different. It was slower, older, almost like the heartbeat of the planet itself. The sea had always been the first cradle, the place where life had first awakened from silence. Every molecule of water carried a trace of that memory, a resonance that connected every living thing back to the beginning. Mew could feel it all. Each current whispered the stories of the world, the rising of continents, the sleeping of volcanoes, the drift of ancient islands now lost to the deep. Even the songs of creatures that had vanished long ago still lingered. Here, woven into the rhythm of the waves. To listen to the ocean was to listen to history itself, not in words, but in pure feeling. And yet, beneath that endless hum, Mew could sense something new, something that did not belong. It was faint at first, like a note played out of tune. But the deeper Mew went, the clearer it became. A tremor of energy, mechanical yet alive, pulsing with an intensity that disturbed the calm of the sea. It was not natural. It did not flow with the pulse, it cut through it. Following the vibration, Mew drifted lower still, toward the ocean floor. The darkness here was almost absolute. Even the faint shimmer of its body seemed to fade into the void. Only when it reached the seabed did it find a faint glow, not of life, but of metal. There, buried beneath the silt and coral, were the remnants of an old structure, twisted beams, shattered glass, fragments of machines. Time had covered them in layers of stone and algae, but their presence was unmistakable. This was not a relic of nature. It was a fragment of humanity. Mew hovered silently above it, its light washing over the wreckage. Long ago, before the laboratories on distant islands perfected their experiments, before Mewtwo's awakening, there had been others, smaller, quieter attempts to understand the mystery of creation. Hidden stations built to study life at its simplest form, far from the eyes of the world. Some had sunk into the sea after their purpose was lost. Others had been forgotten entirely. This one was ancient. The ocean had claimed it completely, yet traces of energy still lingered, faint electromagnetic echoes that resonated through the water. To most, they would have meant nothing. But to Mew, they were unmistakable. Faint impressions of its own genetic pattern. The machines here had once tried to find it. Perhaps they had succeeded, if only for a moment. A hair, a drop, a cell carried by the tide. Even a trace would have been enough to awaken human curiosity, to begin the long chain of questions that would one day lead to Mewtwo. Mew's eyes glowed faintly. It felt no anger, only an old sadness. The humans had always been seekers, reaching for the divine through the tangible. Their hunger to understand life itself was not born from malice, but from awe. And yet, that awe had turned into ambition. In trying to know the origin of life, they had forgotten to listen to it. The water stirred faintly around the ruins. Small fish darted through the broken metal, unaware of the history that slept beneath their fins. The silence here was heavy, filled with echoes of human breath, long gone. Mew drifted closer to the wreckage, and for a moment it reached out, not physically, but through the pulse. Instantly, vision stirred. It saw flashes of the past, figures in white coats, faces half lit by glowing screens, voices speaking words it could not understand, but whose intent was clear. Curiosity, discovery, hope, fear, the desire to hold creation in their hands, to understand what could not be understood. And then, silence. A flood, a storm, perhaps an accident. The sea had risen and taken it all back, erasing the evidence of what had been done. All that remained were the echoes. Mew floated in stillness, absorbing the memory of it. It understood that this place was not unique. There were others like it scattered across the world, forgotten sites where humanity had touched the edges of the unknown and then withdrawn, humbled by the ocean's quiet power. But the pattern was clear now. From these scattered attempts, from the fragments of its essence, gathered and studied in secret, the foundation for something greater had been built. The tremor it felt across the pulse, the presence of Mewtwo, was not a coincidence. It was the culmination of all those echoes. Mew turned its gaze upward. The surface was impossibly far away, hidden behind layers of darkness and time. And yet, even from here, it could sense the light above, faint, distant, but real. The ocean, for all its stillness, had always been a mirror of the sky. It reflected the stars, the clouds, the passing of days. Everything above had its echo below. Mew wondered, not for the first time, whether it too was a reflection, a living echo of something higher still. Perhaps the pulse of creation did not begin on Earth alone. Perhaps it extended beyond, into the cosmos, into places no creature could ever reach. The stars, after all, pulsed in their own rhythm, not unlike hearts. As it rose slowly through the water, leaving the wreckage behind, the hum of the ocean changed once more. The deeper vibrations gave way to lighter tones, the calls of whales, the drift of currents, the gentle stirring of light returning. The world above was awakening. But the echoes followed Mew upward. They clung to it like whispers, faint traces of the human voice, of the dream that had been born in secret and had now taken on a will of its own. Mewtwo's presence was clearer now, sharper, more defined. It was awake, and it was thinking. Mew could sense the new being's thoughts, scattered, stormy, full of pain and confusion. It was searching for identity, for purpose, for meaning. Its mind was vast and brilliant, but its heart was unanchored. It had been created without a dream. And that, Mew realized, was the deepest wound of all. Every creature born from the pulse carries within it a dream, an unconscious longing that connects it to life. The birds dream of the sky, the fish of the sea, the forests of sunlight. Even the smallest spark of existence carries a purpose, a rhythm that guides it. But Mewtwo had no such dream. It had been made by design, not by wonder. Its first breath had been taken not under the open sky, but within glass and shadow. Its first thought had not been awe, but confusion. Its first feeling, loneliness. As Mew broke through the final layer of the sea, the surface parted around it in a quiet bloom of light. The sky stretched above, vast and cloudless. The hidden island shimmered faintly on the horizon, half lost in mist. For a long time, Mew hovered there between sea and sky, listening to both. The echoes of the deep murmured below. The whisper of wind drifted above. Two halves of the same song, one ancient, one new. And between them, the pulse of creation trembled like a string pulled taut. Mew felt the balance tipping. The birth of Mewtwo was not merely another event. It was a new force, a question the world had never asked before. Could life exist without connection? Could a being without dream or wonder still find its place within the pulse? These were not questions Mew could answer, but as it drifted across the water, it carried the echoes with it, the stories buried beneath the sea, the memory of human hands reaching toward the unknown, and the shadow of its own reflection rising to meet the world. Above, the sky deepened into twilight. The first stars began to shimmer, and somewhere, far away, beyond islands, beyond clouds, beyond understanding, a storm was gathering. It was not of wind or rain, but of thought and power. The echo of creation had awakened, and soon it would call to its source. The world was quiet again, but it was a fragile quiet, the kind that trembles beneath its own stillness. The winds had softened, the ocean had calmed, yet within the invisible fabric that connected all life, a new rhythm had begun to stir. It was faint, yet constant, the pulse of a newborn consciousness testing its strength against the weight of existence. Mew felt it always now, like a distant drumbeat beneath the sound of the world. It was neither threat nor comfort, but something beyond both, a presence that did not belong to nature, and yet could not be separated from it anymore. The creation had happened. Mewtwo was alive. From a spark of Mew's own essence, drawn from the remnants of cells collected long ago by human hands, something new had emerged, not as an imitation, but as a transformation. The pulse of creation, once seamless, now carried within it a fracture. Two tones now resonated where once there had been one. And so, Mew began to search, not out of fear, but of curiosity, the same curiosity that had once stirred in those who sought to understand it. For all its sorrow and strangeness, Mewtwo was still part of the same dream. And Mew, who had existed since before the first sunrise, could not ignore the echo of its own reflection. It began its journey at dawn. The sun rose over the horizon in slow silence, painting the ocean in layers of pink and gold. The hidden island drifted behind Mew like a half-forgotten thought. Ahead lay the vastness of the world, continents unseen, skies unmeasured, mysteries still untouched by the weight of knowledge. As it moved through the air, Mew could feel the faint traces of life blooming below. Forests breathing, rivers glittering, mountains whispering their slow, deep language. Everything sang softly in the pulse, a harmony that had guided existence since the first stirring of life. It was this harmony, this balance, that had once made creation effortless. When the world was new, every form of life had emerged from it. As naturally as light from flame, there had been no separation between energy and matter, dream and body. The pulse had been a song, without beginning or end, and from that endless melody, Mew had been born. No one, not even Mew itself, knew how. It had no memory of creation, only the awareness of being, as though it had simply opened its eyes one day and found the world already breathing. It was not the first life, but it was the first that knew it was alive, the first to wonder. In the earliest days, when the planet still shone with the light of forming stars, Mew had wandered through oceans of mist and continents of flame, its body shimmering with the same pink glow that pulsed within every living thing. It had seen the birth of creatures that crawled, swam, flew, and dreamed, each one a variation of the same essence that flowed through its veins. Every Pokémon, in some distant way, carried within it a fragment of Mew's pattern, not through blood, but through memory. The pulse had shaped them all, using Mew's own resonance as the language of life. That was the first great act of creation. And it had been beautiful, effortless, and innocent, born not of intention but of joy. Now, as Mew drifted across the modern world, that memory felt like a song fading into distance. The forests still whispered, but their language was quieter. The rivers still glittered, but their reflections carried shadows of human ambition. The pulse still sang, but beneath it was a new undertone, cold, sharp, restless, the heartbeat of Mewtwo. Mew could feel its presence, not far now, though distance had no meaning between such beings. Their connection was deeper than space or time. It was as though Mew were following a reflection across the surface of a lake. No matter how far it moved, the image moved with it. And yet, for all their sameness, they were different. Mew was the embodiment of life's wonder, pure, playful, curious, free. Mewtwo was the embodiment of life's question, intelligent, powerful, and burdened by thought. Mew was the dream. Mewtwo was the awakening. The pulse had never known such division. As it drifted toward the mainland, Mew passed over a valley carved by age. It was filled with fog and the soft hum of unseen water. The trees here were ancient, their roots older than any human city. They spoke in low tones, not in words, but in vibrations that Mew could feel through the air. It landed upon one of the tallest branches and listened. The forest was uneasy. Something had disturbed the balance. Animals that once sang now hid. The river, once clear, carried traces of strange energies, the residue of machines. Humans had come here, not long ago. They had built, measured, taken samples, and then they had gone, leaving behind silence. But the silence was not empty. It was heavy, filled with something unspoken, the ghost of intention. Mew's light dimmed faintly. It could feel the echo of its own essence in this place, faint traces of DNA that had been extracted, studied, replicated. The forest itself remembered the vibrations of human hands, the electric hum of creation. And somewhere, beyond the horizon, the result of that work was breathing. The wind shifted. The pulse quivered. Mewtwo was awake. Mew closed its eyes and listened deeper. Within the hum of the earth, it could feel the pattern of its counterpart. Mewtwo's energy was intense, far more focused than Mew's own fluid resonance. Where Mew flowed like water, Mewtwo burned like fire. Its pulse was clean and powerful, but rigid, bound by purpose. It was thinking endlessly, searching, asking questions that could not yet be answered. Mew could feel the weight of that thought pressing against the world, bending the air, disturbing the balance of energy. It was not malice, it was confusion. Mewtwo had not been born into peace. It had been created into isolation. It knew it was alive, but not why. And so, its mind searched for meaning, and in its search, it began to shape reality itself. Storms gathered where it lingered. The air thickened with psychic energy. Even the pulse bent around it, uncertain how to contain something that was both natural and unnatural at once. For the first time since the dawn of life, creation was questioning itself. Mew remained still upon the branch, its gaze soft. The breeze moved through its fur, carrying the scent of rain. It understood now that this was not the beginning of destruction, but the next chapter of evolution. The pulse transforming through conflict, as it always had. Every age of life had its turning. There had been the age of stone and sea, when the first sparks of consciousness emerged. The age of forests, when life learned to breathe together. The age of humanity, when thought began to shape the natural world. And now, perhaps, the age of reflection, where life would face its own image and ask what it truly meant to exist. Mewtwo was not a mistake. It was a mirror. And mirrors, though painful, were necessary for growth. The forest began to stir as dawn broke fully. Sunlight cut through the fog, turning the mist into rivers of gold. Birds began to call, their voices tentative but growing. The pulse, though still trembling, was finding its rhythm again, adjusting to the new frequency introduced by Mewtwo's existence. Mew rose into the air, letting the light wash over it. Its shadow was barely visible against the brilliance of morning. It felt the pulse moving through it, slower now, but steady. The balance could yet be restored. But Mew understood something else, something it had never truly faced before. The pulse itself was changing. It was no longer the same as it had been in the first dream. The introduction of intellect, of human thought, and synthetic life had altered the very nature of creation. Life was learning to create itself. That realization was both beautiful and terrifying. The cycle, that had once moved in harmony with instinct, was now guided by will. Evolution was no longer only nature's song. It was humanity's question. And Mew, who had once been the origin of all, now watched as the world began to write its own continuation. The title it had never claimed, progenitor, ancestor, source, was no longer its alone. The pattern had spread. The dream had expanded beyond its own boundaries. Mew drifted higher, its form almost invisible against the sunlight. Below, the forest shimmered with life. Above, the sky stretched endlessly, its blue deepening toward eternity. Somewhere, far away, Mewtwo moved across the world, its energy resonating with growing strength. The pulse of creation was no longer a single voice. It had become a chorus, and though dissonant, it was alive, evolving, expanding, learning to sing in new ways. For the first time since the beginning, Mew felt something it could not name. Not sorrow, not joy, but a quiet humility. It realized that being the origin of all did not mean being the master of all. Creation was not possession, it was a cycle. Every echo would one day become a new voice, every reflection a new light. Mew had been the first dream, Mewtwo was the first awakening. And perhaps, somewhere in the future, countless others would rise, not as copies, but as continuations of the same song. As the sun climbed higher, Mew turned toward the horizon. The sky shimmered faintly with unseen energy, the kind that came before great change. The pulse vibrated in its bones, deep and solemn, as if preparing for something immense. The world was shifting again, and Mew, as always, would bear witness. Life is never singular. Even the quietest heartbeat carries within it the memory of countless others, an echo of patterns stretching back through uncounted ages. It is not merely biology, not merely instinct. It is something older, subtler, woven into the very fabric of being. A spark, faint yet persistent, that guides each creature through the rhythm of existence. For Mew, this spark had always been clear. It flowed within it like a river of light, invisible yet undeniable. It was the origin of every movement, every thought, every breath of life. Every creature born from the pulse carried a fragment of it, even the smallest Pokémon, even the briefest flash of consciousness, even those that had long since vanished. But now, in the quiet aftermath of Mewtwo's awakening, Mew perceived something new. A subtle variation, a pattern within a pattern, a resonance that pulsed beneath the pulse. It was the dreaming gene. Mew drifted silently over a dense forest, light filtering in delicate beams through the canopy. Birds moved in gentle arcs, insects shimmered like drifting jewels, and the air itself seemed to hum faintly with life. Every heartbeat, every flutter of wings, every sigh of the wind carried the hidden rhythm of the gene, a code older than memory, older than the earliest forests, older than the rise of mountains. The dreaming gene was the seed of imagination, the foundation of instinct shaped by consciousness. It allowed creatures not only to survive, but to dream, to reach beyond immediate need, to explore, to play, to grow. It was the invisible hand that had guided evolution, weaving patterns of behavior that resonated with the world. Mew could sense it as clearly as it could sense its own heartbeat. And yet, in the shadow of Mewtwo's presence, the dreaming gene vibrated differently. The artificial extraction of Mew's essence, twisted into synthetic creation, had altered it. Mewtwo's gene was an echo of the original, stronger, sharper, yet without the gentle rhythm that gave life its subtle wonder. Its dreams were not natural. They were constructed, shaped by will rather than wonder. It was a stark contrast, the difference between life that flowed and life that had been forced to awaken. Mew hovered above a small clearing where the sun struck the ground in golden pools. Tiny Pokémon moved through the grass, unaware of the larger world. They played, hunted, and explored, each guided by the dreaming gene within them. Their curiosity was pure, unshaped by design or intention. Every leap, every flight, every dash of color across the clearing was a testament to the gene's quiet influence. Mew watched them, tracing the threads of their dreams with the same care it once traced the pulse of creation itself. It could feel the resonance of life, vibrant and unbroken, flowing naturally through every being. It was a pattern that could not be taught, only inherited, only lived, and it was beautiful. Yet the forest, tranquil as it seemed, carried an undercurrent of unease. Somewhere, far beyond the trees, the tremor of human ambition persisted. Laboratories hum, machines whir, and somewhere hidden beneath stone and soil, Mewtwo was learning to channel the dreaming gene in ways the world had never intended. Mew's gaze turned toward the horizon. The hidden island glimmered faintly, distant yet connected, a nexus of memory and life. It was a reminder that while the gene flowed through all natural life, it could be twisted, harnessed, and used in unnatural ways. Mew understood the responsibility of its existence more deeply than ever. It was not only the origin of life, it was the guardian of its potential. The dreaming gene, fragile as it was, had to survive intact. Without it, even power could not create true wonder. In its hovering, Mew reached out invisibly to the currents of the gene. It could feel its essence branching through the world, delicate yet resilient, touching every Pokémon in subtle ways. Every movement of a tail, every flutter of wings, every burst of speed was a conversation between the gene and the world, a dialogue written in instinct, freedom, and dream. And somewhere, in a distant, unseen laboratory, a reflection of that gene stirred in a mind that was not fully natural. Mewtwo's thoughts radiated faintly, trying to reach the same understanding, trying to replicate the connection that came effortlessly to life itself. Mew did not move toward it. It did not intervene. But it remained vigilant, tracing the pattern through the world, ensuring that the essence of the dreaming gene remained strong in every natural being. The sun rose higher, and the forest responded. The wind carried scents of growth and water, the calls of distant creatures threaded through the air like faint songs, and the pulse of the world resonated once more with quiet harmony. Mew descended into the forest itself, moving among the branches and leaves with gentle precision. It passed over sleeping Pokémon, their tiny forms glowing faintly in the soft morning light. The dreaming gene pulsed within them, uncorrupted, a testament to the purity of life, untouched by human interference. Mew felt a subtle joy in the simplicity of it, a deep satisfaction that life continued to flourish. And yet, beneath that joy was always a lingering concern, the knowledge that somewhere the gene had been fractured. Somewhere it was being learned, altered, misunderstood. Mew hovered above a small stream, watching the water ripple and shimmer with the light of dawn. Reflected within it were images of countless lives: fish that glided through the water, insects that danced above the surface, birds that swooped across the sky. Each carried a whisper of the gene, its influence subtle yet undeniable. It was in these quiet moments that Mew understood its purpose most fully. It was not simply to exist, or to guard itself, or even to witness the world. It was to ensure that life retained the capacity to dream, to hope, and to reach beyond itself. Every creature, no matter how small, was a continuation of that original song, and every song, no matter how faint, mattered. As the day stretched on, Mew moved higher again, soaring above the forest canopy. The world spread out in all directions, vast and interconnected, alive with countless pulses of the gene. Mountains, rivers, oceans, forests, each a node in the vast network of life, each influenced in some way by the dreaming gene. Mew's light shimmered faintly against the morning sky. It carried within it the memory of every age, every forest, every ocean, every dawn and dusk since the beginning. It carried the pulse of creation itself, and within it, the dreaming gene, fragile, resilient, unbroken. Somewhere, far away, Mewtwo stirred once more, the unnatural echo of the gene pulsing within it. Its mind reached outward, probing, learning, searching for a connection it had never known. Mew felt its presence, distant yet intimately linked, and understood that the next chapter in the cycle of life was beginning. It would persist through natural life, through instinct and curiosity, through play and exploration, and even in its reflection, even in Mewtwo, it would continue to shape the world, though in ways the universe itself had yet to understand. Mew drifted higher still, toward the horizon. The forest below glowed faintly with life. The ocean shimmered in gentle undulations. Mountains rose like ancient sentinels. The sky stretched infinitely above. The pulse of creation had been fractured, but it was not broken. The dreaming gene flowed still, quietly, through every living thing. And Mew, eternal and luminous, would continue to watch, to guide, to remember. For life is not only born from the beginning, but also from the act of dreaming itself. The world was changing, subtly, but inexorably. Where Mew once had wandered in quiet harmony, it now sensed tension, a new energy threading through forests, mountains, and seas. The pulse of creation, once smooth and continuous, now carried a tremor, faint but persistent, signaling the emergence of forces not entirely natural. These were the shadows, not creatures of malice, but echoes of intent, born from the intersection of life and human ambition. They moved silently, unseen by those who lived on the surface, yet their presence was undeniable to Mew. They were the consequences of experimentation, the unintentional offspring of humanity's search for understanding. Mew drifted above the forests, following the invisible currents that connected the world. The wind carried whispers of energy, subtle shifts in the rhythm of life, resonances of dreams interrupted. Every leaf, every bird, every small creature vibrated in response. They were alive, yet they bore faint traces of imbalance, reminders that creation had been touched in ways it had not anticipated. Beneath the forest canopy, Mew sensed the first shadow taking form, the early stirrings of Mewtwo's influence, distant, yet tangible. Though separated by space, the resonance was undeniable, like a pebble dropped in the ocean of the pulse. It spread outward, touching nodes of life in tiny increments, bending the natural rhythm just enough to leave traces of disquiet. Mew did not react with fear. It had witnessed the birth of the world itself. It had seen cycles of rise and fall, of chaos giving way to harmony. But it observed with care, knowing that even the smallest imbalance could ripple through existence in unexpected ways. The shadows were subtle at first, faint reflections of life already present, a tree that bent differently, a stream that sang in altered tones, an animal whose instinct felt slightly askew. They were not yet fully realized, but their emergence carried a weight, a hint of the force that was to come. Mew hovered over a river, its surface reflecting the morning light in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Beneath the water, currents shifted with a faint discordance, ripples that did not match the natural flow. It was here that the shadows first touched the pulse in a concentrated form. The water carried hints of Mewtwo's creation, fragments of its consciousness influencing the rhythm of life. Yet even in this disturbance, there was no destruction. The world, resilient as ever, adjusted. Nature absorbed the irregularity and redistributed it, like wind, smoothing the surface of waves. Mew watched this delicate balance with quiet intensity, aware that each correction was temporary. The shadows were growing stronger, learning to adapt, and their influence would become increasingly evident. Mew moved higher, following the pattern as it spread across the landscape. Mountains and valleys echoed the subtle shifts, and even the air seemed heavier in response. The pulse, while steady, was no longer singular. It had fractured into multiple tones, each reflecting the natural and the artificial, the original and the reflection. It was a symphony, not yet harmonious. Above the horizon, the sky deepened in color, the fading sunlight highlighting the vast expanse of the world. Mew's glow became more pronounced, a steady beacon against the gathering dimness. Its presence anchored the pulse, offering a counterpoint to the subtle distortions spreading from human creation. The shadows were aware of Mew, not conscious in the way living beings are, yet responsive. They adjusted their movements, their influence growing more refined, testing boundaries without understanding their own origins. Each ripple they produced carried hints of thought, a nascent intelligence forming around the echoes of Mew's essence used to create Mewtwo. The forests beneath Mew stirred as well. Animals moved with an almost imperceptible hesitation, reacting to changes in instinct that they could not comprehend. plants bent subtly toward or away from the influence of the shadows. Even the soil seemed to vibrate in minor pulses, a quiet acknowledgement of the unnatural force at work. Mew's gaze shifted toward the hidden island in the distance, its reflection faint in the waves below. There, the pulse remained pure, unbroken by human ambition. It was a sanctuary, a source of renewal. Mew understood that the island would serve as a point of restoration if the shadows grew too dominant. It was a reminder that while creation could be influenced, it could not be controlled completely. Night fell, and with it, the shadows gained more form. Under the cover of darkness, their influence became more distinct, extending into areas of life that had previously been untouched. The pulse of nocturnal creatures changed subtly. Streams reflected not only starlight, but faint distortions of the unnatural energy moving through the land. Mew followed the flow with careful precision, noting each shift, each irregularity. Its presence was quiet but constant, a stabilizing force in a world beginning to wrestle with the consequences of ambition. The pulse responded to Mew, strengthening in areas touched by its light, though the shadows continued their slow expansion. The first signs of direct influence appeared near a remote cave, deep within a mountain range. The cave was untouched by humans, yet the shadows had begun to gather there, concentrating as if forming a nucleus of potential energy. Within its darkness, the pulse vibrated with an unusual intensity, a combination of natural life and artificial resonance. Mew hovered at the cave entrance, observing. The shadows were becoming aware, testing limits, probing the boundaries of life and energy itself. They moved with intent now, not just as echoes, but as forces interacting with the world. It was here, Mew understood, that the next stage would begin. The shadows were forming a consciousness, a precursor to something that could challenge the natural flow of the pulse. But Mew did not approach aggressively. It did not strike. Instead, it maintained its vigil, a calm presence above the gathering disturbance. The world beneath it was in flux, yet not yet beyond repair. Every pulse, every ripple of energy, was being observed and balanced by the original force of life itself. The night deepened, and the first stars emerged in the sky, their light faintly mirrored by the rippling waters below. Mew remained aloft, its gaze unwavering. The shadows continued to stir, their influence extending outward, yet each movement carried traces of Mew's own essence, a reminder that the pulse of creation remained aware, even in the face of new forces. By the time the moon rose fully, casting its silver glow across the landscape, the shadows had begun to take shape, not fully realized, but forming with coherence and intent. They were learning, adapting, existing in the space between natural life and synthetic influence. And all the while, Mew observed, its calm presence, ensuring that the world retained the capacity to restore balance. The first stage of their awakening was complete. The shadows were no longer mere echoes. They were now forces of influence, capable of altering instinct, movement, and subtle patterns of life. The pulse of creation, while still dominant, had been tested, its harmony momentarily disturbed. Mew hovered silently, understanding that this was not the end, but a beginning. The shadows would continue to grow, to interact, to challenge the boundaries of life itself. And in that challenge lay the possibility of evolution, of learning, of adaptation. The night was quiet once more, yet heavy with anticipation. The pulse of creation thrummed softly, responding to both natural life and the growing influence of the shadows. Mew remained aloft, a guardian and witness, its glow steady against the dark expanse of the world below. For in the quiet of the car, night, the first true confrontation between natural life and the echoes of human ambition, had begun. And Mew, as it always had, would watch. The world had shifted. Where Mew once moved freely, guided only by the pulse of creation, there was now a new rhythm, sharp, deliberate, and unfamiliar. It cut through the natural flow like a stone tossed into still water, sending ripples outward that touched forests, rivers, mountains, and seas. This was the presence of Mewtwo, fully awakened, aware of itself, and beginning to understand its own existence. It was born from the essence of Mew, but it was not Mew. Its heartbeat was stronger, more focused, yet lacking the fluid grace of life that came effortlessly to the original. Where Mew's pulse flowed like wind through the trees, Mewtwo's struck with precision and intent, deliberate and unyielding. Mew watched from a distance, floating above the ocean that connected continents and islands. Its gaze was steady, serene, yet weighted with the knowledge of what had begun. Mewtwo's emergence was not sudden, nor was it chaotic. It had been crafted with care by human ambition, nurtured into awareness in a controlled environment. But control could not fully dictate life. The moment it awoke, it carried within it curiosity, confusion, and an undeniable force, the raw power of its own consciousness. The first stirrings of Mewtwo were subtle. In the laboratory where its cells had been assembled, instruments that measured energy fluctuations recorded anomalies that no human fully understood. Machines hummed under the strain of a being whose mind was far beyond their comprehension. And somewhere in the chambers, Mewtwo's thoughts reached outward, touching the pulse, testing boundaries, questioning its own existence. It did not yet move beyond the confines of its creation, but the world felt its presence. Animals near the lab exhibited strange behaviors, hesitation in their movements, patterns disrupted for no visible reason. Plants bent subtly toward or away from the source, as though sensing the unnatural energy that flowed like an invisible current through the air. Mew observed all of it, not with fear, but with careful attention. It had seen life adapt, evolve, and shift countless times before, yet this was different. Mewtwo was not merely life, it was life aware of itself, conscious in a way that demanded understanding, and born without the natural guidance of instinct or dream. The first attempts to move beyond the laboratory were quiet. Mewtwo extended its awareness, reaching for the boundaries of the building, the walls, the land outside. Every heartbeat was deliberate, a calculation of its own power. Energy radiated outward, subtle yet undeniable, and the pulse responded immediately. Mew felt it as a tremor beneath the usual harmony of the world. Not destructive, yet not entirely aligned. Mewtwo's essence carried intent, not instinct. It sought connection, yet it did not yet understand how to integrate with life around it. Its existence alone was a question, a challenge to the pulse that had guided creation for eons. From the hidden island, Mew drifted closer, following the faint vibrations of its own essence that had been altered and shaped by human hands. It did not approach directly, nor did it attempt to intervene. It moved like a quiet current of observation, witnessing the emergence of something that was at once part of it and apart from it. The first movements outside the laboratory were cautious. Mewtwo's body, strong and lithe, stretched into awareness of space, testing gravity, air, and its own strength. The shadows that had been stirring in forests and mountains sensed the new presence and responded, retreating, adjusting, as though aware that something singular had arrived. Mew observed the interaction. It understood that Mewtwo's influence would spread, and in that spread would come both adaptation and tension. Where natural life followed patterns shaped by instinct and dream, Mewtwo's presence carried the imprint of design and intention. It was learning, not simply existing. As days passed, Mewtwo extended its reach beyond the immediate confines of its origin. Birds paused in flight, fish altered their paths in subtle ways, and the earth itself seemed to respond to the energy that radiated from this new being. Mew, floating above forests and rivers, felt the pulse shift. It was not destructive, but it was unlike any natural rhythm the world had experienced. Mewtwo's first conscious explorations were both deliberate and instinctual. It tested its power, lifting objects without touch, moving air and water as though they were extensions of itself. The forests trembled faintly in response. The soil shifted imperceptibly, and the wind carried ripples that Mew could feel even from great distance. Yet Mewtwo was alone in its understanding. It did not yet recognize companionship, the gentle flow of instinct shared with other life. It understood only itself and the world as a problem to navigate, a puzzle to solve, a power to command. Its awareness was immense, its intellect profound, yet it lacked the natural guidance of wonder. Mew watched silently, drifting above the landscapes that now bore traces of Mewtwo's presence. It saw the subtle changes in life patterns, creatures hesitating, rivers shifting slightly, trees bending in uncharacteristic ways. The pulse was adjusting, accommodating this unprecedented being, yet strain was evident. The balance had been tested, and the world was responding. Mewtwo's understanding of its own power grew with each passing moment. It learned to manipulate the environment, to extend its awareness through objects, animals, and even the faint echoes of the pulse itself. Its control was precise, its strength undeniable. Yet the softness of instinct, the spontaneity of natural life, remained foreign to it. Mew could feel the conflict within its reflection. It sensed the longing for connection, the confusion of isolation, the search for purpose. Mewtwo did not yet hate, but it had been born into a world that demanded adaptation without guidance. Its power was immense, yet untempered by wisdom or instinct. The forests and mountains, the rivers and seas, all felt the first ripple of Mewtwo's emergence. Life adapted subtly, following patterns it did not consciously understand. Even the shadows that had been stirring in quiet corners adjusted their movements, responding to a force both stronger and more deliberate than themselves. Mew observed this with calm patience. It understood that the rise of Mewtwo was not the end of life, but a new phase. A reflection had awakened, and the world would learn to integrate it, just as it had learned to integrate countless forms of life before. The pulse, though tested, remained resilient, guided by Mew's presence and the natural rhythms of existence. Night fell over the world, and with it, Mewtwo's presence became more concentrated. It moved with deliberate precision, testing boundaries, expanding awareness, and exploring the extent of its own consciousness. The world responded subtly. The wind shifted, the earth vibrated faintly, and the waters reflected a light not of the sun, but of the resonance that flowed from this extraordinary being. Mew remained aloft, a quiet sentinel, observing the rise of its reflection. It did not intervene, for it understood that life must test itself, that awareness must learn its limits and capacities. Mewtwo's rise was inevitable, yet necessary. A part of the continuing song of creation, the stars emerged in the night sky, reflected faintly in rivers and lakes, and Mew's light shimmered gently as it floated above the world. The pulse of creation had been challenged, but it had not broken. The world had adjusted, and life continued to thrive, even as a new force had awakened to test the boundaries of power, consciousness, and instinct. Mewtwo's first full day outside the laboratory had passed, and with it, the first chapter of its emergence had closed. The reflection of Mew had become something singular, aware, powerful, and searching. The shadows and echoes of life had already begun to adjust, and the balance of the world had shifted, subtly but undeniably. Mew observed quietly, knowing that the rise of its reflection was only the beginning. The pulse of creation would adapt, life would learn to respond, and the song of existence would continue. The harmony of instinct, dream, and awareness would find a new rhythm, one that included the powerful consciousness now walking the world. And somewhere, deep within the hidden recesses of the earth, the dreaming gene pulsed steadily, guiding natural life and reminding the world of the balance that could endure even in the presence of a being as extraordinary as Mewtwo. Mew drifted slowly into the night, its gaze fixed upon the horizon, a silent witness to the rise of a force that would shape the world for generations to come. The world had shifted in subtle ways since Mewtwo's awakening. Where once the pulse of creation flowed in quiet harmony, now there were rhythms that pulsed with tension. The shadows that had stirred before now moved with more intent, guided by the echoes of Mewtwo's presence. Even life that had been untouched by human interference felt the pull of the new energy, a whisper of change that threaded through air, earth, and water. Mew drifted above a forest clearing, its soft pink glow illuminating the early morning mist. The light of dawn filtered through the trees, casting long, gentle shadows across the ground. Beneath it, the forest had begun to respond to the growing tension in the pulse. Birds hesitated mid-flight, their calls uncertain. Small creatures froze in place, sensing a force they could not understand. Even the rivers rippled differently, carrying the faint tremor of Mewtwo's awakening downstream. It was here that the first true confrontation was to occur, not between Mew and Mewtwo in the sense of hostility, but between instinct and will, between the natural pulse of life and the focused, deliberate energy of the newly emerged being. Mewtwo had begun to test its limits, extending its awareness beyond the laboratory and into the surrounding wilderness. The forest was the first arena, a living network of instincts, currents, and energy. Mew drifted silently, following the tremors of the pulse, observing how the world responded to this extraordinary presence. Mewtwo's consciousness stretched outward, touching trees, rivers, and animals. Its mind sought understanding, probing the instincts of living beings, analyzing their patterns, attempting to comprehend life as Mew had once understood it naturally. The shadows responded, bending subtly, retreating when challenged, adjusting when pressed. It was a delicate interaction, one without words, without sound, yet filled with tension and learning. Mew watched closely. It did not interfere, for interference would disrupt the natural course of this emergence. Mewtwo had to encounter the world on its own terms, to understand the limits of its power, the boundaries of instinct, and the weight of consciousness in a world not entirely built for it. The first direct interaction occurred when Mewtwo extended its energy toward a flock of birds. They scattered instinctively, but not all were quick enough. One small bird froze in midair, caught between instinct and the force pressing upon it. Mew observed, noting how the natural patterns adapted. The flock recovered, readjusting their flight paths in response to the disturbance. The pulse absorbed the tremor, smoothing over the irregularity, yet the impression remained. Mew understood immediately. This was the nature of the first confrontation. It was not battle, not conflict in the sense of aggression, but the meeting of natural life and a being whose consciousness had not been tempered by instinct or the rhythm of the world. The forest was testing Mewtwo as much as Mewtwo was testing it. Further along, a river became the site of another subtle exchange. Mewtwo extended its awareness into the water, lifting stones and stirring currents without touch. Fish darted in unexpected patterns, and aquatic plants bent in response to the invisible force. Mew drifted overhead, observing how the pulse redistributed energy, accommodating the intrusion while maintaining balance. The confrontation was becoming more complex, involving multiple elements of the environment simultaneously. The forest floor, once calm, now exhibited signs of tension. Leaves rustled with small, precise movements, animals adjusted their paths instinctively, and even the soil seemed to respond to the growing influence of Mewtwo's presence. The shadows that had previously moved independently now aligned subtly with Mewtwo, reflecting and refracting its energy in unpredictable ways. Mew's light glowed steadily, a stabilizing force in a world, beginning to learn how to integrate this new power. Its gaze was focused, yet serene, observing without interference. The first confrontation was not about dominance, but about adaptation. It was a lesson for Mewtwo, for the forest, and for the pulse itself. As the day progressed, Mewtwo's movements became more confident, more deliberate. It experimented with the limits of its psychic power, moving trees without touching them, guiding streams with a thought, influencing the behaviors of animals with subtle waves of energy. Each experiment produced feedback, a ripple of consequence that spread through the natural world. The shadows observed, adapted, and sometimes retreated, but always with awareness. Mew followed, gliding above treetops and hills, noting every adjustment. It could feel the pulse stretching, bending, and learning, responding to a force that was both natural and unnatural. This confrontation was not violent, yet it carried weight. It tested the resilience of life, the integrity of instinct, and the capacity of the dreaming gene to guide living beings in the presence of an unprecedented consciousness. By evening, The first confrontation had reached its peak. Mewtwo hovered above the river, energy radiating outward in a deliberate display of awareness and exploration. The forest, rivers, and mountains had adapted to the presence of this extraordinary being, each responding in its own way, finding balance in the tension between instinct and will. Mew drifted slowly above, watching as the pulse regained equilibrium. The shadows had adjusted, learning to coexist with a force far greater than themselves. Animals moved again with confidence, rivers flowed naturally, and the forest resumed its subtle rhythm. The confrontation had ended, not with resolution, but with understanding. Mew understood that this was only the first of many confrontations. Life and consciousness were learning to coexist, to adapt, and to integrate forces that had never previously met. The rise of Mewtwo had tested the world, and the world had responded. Night fell, and with it, a quiet peace returned to the forest. Stars reflected in the river, moonlight glimmered through leaves, and the pulse of creation resumed its steady rhythm, though altered now by the presence of the extraordinary being that had awakened. Mew hovered above, a calm witness, its light a constant presence against the dark expanse of the world. The first confrontation had been a lesson for Mewtwo, for the forest, and for the pulse itself. It had shown the boundaries, the capacities, and the resilience of life. And though the journey was far from over, Mew knew one thing: the harmony of the world would endure. The dreaming gene would persist, guiding instinct, play, and exploration. The shadows would continue to adjust, and Mewtwo, in time, would learn the balance between power and purpose, between consciousness and instinct. The first confrontation was complete, yet the story was only beginning. Mew drifted into the night, a silent guardian, carrying the weight of knowledge, the memory of life's first dreams, and the watchful presence of a being who had witnessed the rise of something truly extraordinary. The world had settled into a delicate rhythm once more. The first confrontation between Mew and Mewtwo had passed, leaving echoes of its resonance through forests, rivers, and mountains. Life had adapted, yet the pulse of creation now carried a subtle shift. It had been tested, stretched, and altered, but it endured, as resilient and enduring as it had always been. Mew drifted above a quiet forest, its presence a soft luminescence against the morning mist. Beneath it, the earth breathed with life, carrying traces of every interaction, every ripple of energy, every reflection of Mewtwo's awakening. The dreaming gene pulsed steadily in every living being, guiding instinct, curiosity, and play, even as the world adjusted to the new presence of a consciousness born outside of natural evolution. The lessons of the pulse were becoming clear. Mew observed how life learned to adapt, responding not only to natural patterns but also to the intrusion of extraordinary force. Birds adjusted their flight paths, rivers flowed with subtle alterations, and animals moved with heightened awareness. The balance had been tested, and yet it persisted, stronger and more flexible for the challenge it had faced. Mew hovered over a small clearing where sunlight touched the forest floor in delicate beams. Tiny Pokémon moved among the grass, their behaviors subtly altered by the previous day's events. They played and explored, guided by the dreaming gene, yet they now carried a faint echo of resilience, a lesson absorbed from the first encounter with Mewtwo's influence. It was in these quiet, ordinary moments that Mew understood the depth of the pulse's teaching. Creation itself learned. Life was not merely surviving or existing. It was absorbing knowledge, adjusting instinct, and integrating experiences into its natural rhythm. The first confrontation had not been destructive. It had been instructive. Mew moved gently through the forest, tracing the threads of the pulse with a careful awareness. Every leaf, every fluttering insect, every ripple of water carried information. The natural world was communicating lessons learned from the presence of a consciousness unlike any it had encountered before. The pulse, ancient and enduring, had begun to incorporate these lessons, subtly reshaping the flow of life. The river, once disturbed by Mewtwo's energy, now flowed with renewed clarity. Fish navigated its currents with ease, and aquatic plants swayed in harmonious rhythm. The forest floor, too, had regained stability, its inhabitants moving confidently once again. Yet beneath this calm surface, traces of the encounter lingered, faint ripples in instinct, subtle shifts in behavior, evidence of the resilience that life had cultivated in response to new forces. Mew's attention shifted to the shadows that had previously stirred. They moved differently now, guided by the lessons absorbed during the confrontation. Their patterns, once irregular and unpredictable, now reflected a form of order, a quiet harmony born from observation and adaptation. Even the shadows had learned from the pulse, integrating the rhythm of life into their movements without disturbing the balance. The presence of Mewtwo, though still distant, remained a constant undercurrent. Its influence spread subtly, touching ecosystems and life forms without direct interaction. Mew observed how natural instinct and conscious intent coexisted in this new reality. The lessons of the pulse were not about dominance or control. They were about adaptation, balance, and understanding. As the day progressed, Mew's journey took it across varied landscapes, mountains, valleys, rivers, and forests, each responding uniquely to the lingering energy of Mewtwo's awakening. The pulse vibrated differently in each environment, yet it maintained a continuity that spoke to the resilience of life itself. Mew traced these variations, understanding how the world absorbed lessons from extraordinary events and integrated them into the ongoing flow of existence. It hovered above a mountain ridge, where the wind moved in complex patterns, carrying the sense of distant forests and rivers. The pulse here was particularly strong, reflecting both the natural rhythms of life and the subtle adjustments induced by Mewtwo's presence. Mew extended its awareness, feeling the interplay of forces, the delicate balance between instinct, curiosity, and conscious influence. The lessons of the pulse were manifold. Life had demonstrated adaptability, resilience, and the capacity to integrate new experiences. Even consciousness born outside of natural evolution could be absorbed into the rhythm of existence without shattering it. The world had adjusted, not perfectly, but sufficiently, finding a harmony that accommodated both natural instinct and extraordinary awareness. Mew's own light shimmered gently, a beacon of continuity and understanding. Its presence reinforced the pulse, offering a stabilizing influence that ensured the lessons of the first confrontation were absorbed without lasting disruption. The world was learning, and Mew was both witness and guide, facilitating the subtle education of life itself. In a quiet valley, Mew observed a small group of Pokémon interacting near a stream. Their movements were precise yet playful, guided by instinct yet informed by subtle lessons absorbed from the surrounding environment. The dreaming gene pulsed strongly within them, reinforcing the natural rhythm of exploration and curiosity. The encounter with Mewtwo's energy had left them altered, but not damaged, wiser, more aware, yet still free. Mew's thoughts drifted to the broader implications. The rise of Mewtwo, the confrontation with the shadows, the adjustments of the natural world, all were part of a cycle of learning, adaptation, and evolution. The pulse of creation was not static. It was dynamic, capable of absorbing new forces, integrating lessons, and guiding life toward equilibrium. Even in the presence of extraordinary power, the natural world maintained its capacity to learn and adapt. The first confrontation had been a test, and the world had passed. Life had absorbed the influence without losing its essence, and the dreaming gene continued to guide the instincts of every living being. Mew drifted higher, observing the landscape below. Forests stretched endlessly, rivers wound through valleys, mountains rose with ancient majesty, and the ocean glimmered in the distance. Everywhere, the pulse carried the lessons of the first confrontation, a subtle resonance that strengthened life's resilience and adaptability. The shadows, now more ordered and harmonious, moved through the environment with purpose, guided by the understanding they had absorbed. Mewtwo's influence remained a distant undercurrent, shaping the world without overwhelming it. The first confrontation had not been a battle of destruction, but a teaching, a demonstration of how life, instinct, and consciousness could coexist and learn from one another. As night fell, Mew's presence remained steady, a calm light against the dark expanse of the world. Stars reflected in rivers and lakes, the moon cast gentle illumination across the landscape, and the pulse of creation resonated with renewed clarity. The lessons had been absorbed, the balance restored, and life continued, stronger and wiser for the experience. Mew understood that this was only the beginning. The world would continue to encounter extraordinary forces, and each challenge would leave traces in the pulse, teaching life to adapt, integrate, and endure. The first confrontation had set a precedent that even the most unusual and powerful consciousness could be absorbed into the rhythm of existence without destroying it. The dreaming gene pulsed steadily within every creature, reinforcing instinct, curiosity, and the capacity for wonder. Shadows moved in harmony with life, and Mewtwo's presence, though powerful and deliberate, was integrated into the world's ongoing cycle. Mew drifted slowly into the night, a silent guardian and observer. The lessons of the pulse were clear. Life is resilient, adaptable, and capable of learning from extraordinary events. Consciousness and instinct can coexist, and the natural world, guided by the subtle force of the dreaming gene, will endure. The first confrontation had ended, but the story of Mew and Mewtwo, and the lessons of the pulse, would continue. The world was ready to learn, and Mew would remain, as always, a quiet witness to the unfolding song of life. The world had grown quieter in the days following Mewtwo's awakening and the first confrontation. Yet, beneath the seeming calm, subtle ripples of tension persisted. Even as life adapted, even as the pulse regained harmony, there remained an echo, a shadow that moved not through the forests, rivers, or mountains, but through consciousness itself. Mew drifted above a dense forest at twilight, the soft glow of its presence illuminating the mist that clung to the ground. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers, the subtle vibrations of life resonating through the trees. Birds settled into their nests, insects returned to their hidden chambers, and rivers flowed smoothly through their winding paths. All seemed tranquil, yet Mew could sense the faint stirrings of the shadow within, a residue of intent born from the extraordinary force that had emerged in Mewtwo. It was not malice, nor was it overtly destructive. It was curiosity twisted by isolation, power untempered by instinct, a quiet dissonance in the otherwise harmonious pulse of creation. Mew understood it instinctively. It had seen echoes of imbalance before, in the earliest days when life was fragile, when instinct and intellect first learned to coexist. Yet, this shadow was different, subtler, more persistent, born from consciousness that questioned itself without guidance. Mew hovered over the forest canopy, feeling the subtle tremors of energy threading through the trees. Each movement of the leaves, each stir of wind, carried traces of an awareness struggling to understand itself. Mewtwo's consciousness had spread beyond its origin, reaching into the pulse, testing limits, probing boundaries. The shadow within it was a reflection of isolation, a product of being both immensely powerful and fundamentally alone. The first signs appeared in small, almost imperceptible ways. A river shifted slightly from its natural course, not from force, but from intent. A flock of birds hesitated mid-flight, their instincts disrupted by an energy they could not interpret. Tiny creatures on the forest floor froze momentarily, sensing the tension that radiated from a mind unlike any they had encountered before. Mew observed each subtle change with serene attentiveness. It did not intervene, for intervention would disrupt the natural learning of life. The shadow within the pulse needed to be understood, both by Mewtwo and by the world it influenced. Balance could not be forced. It could only emerge through careful adaptation and awareness. As night fell, the shadow within became more distinct. The absence of sunlight amplified the subtle vibrations of consciousness, and Mew could trace the energy as it weaved through forests, mountains, and streams. This shadow was not bound to physical form. It existed in the space between thought and instinct, in the delicate intersection of curiosity and power. It was a presence that demanded recognition, not confrontation. Mew drifted toward a small clearing where a group of Pokémon had gathered near a stream. Their behaviors were altered subtly by the shadow's influence. They moved with heightened awareness, their instincts tempered by an energy that was both foreign and compelling. The dreaming gene pulsed steadily within them, guiding adaptation, ensuring that curiosity did not tip into chaos. That instinct could coexist with the subtle intrusion of extraordinary awareness. The forest itself seemed to breathe in response. Trees bent slightly in the wind, their leaves whispering faintly as though acknowledging the presence of a force beyond comprehension. Streams shimmered in the moonlight, their surfaces reflecting not only stars, but the subtle distortions in the pulse caused by the shadow. The world was learning to absorb and integrate this new form of energy without breaking its own rhythm. Mew's glow illuminated the clearing softly, a stabilizing presence amid the subtle dissonance. It had seen this before, in countless forms, across ages, across landscapes. The shadow within was a challenge to the harmony of life, yet it was not an enemy. It was a lesson for Mewtwo, for natural life, and for the pulse itself. Mew moved higher, tracing the shadow as it stretched across mountains and valleys. It could feel the tension in every living thing, in the movements of nocturnal creatures, in the subtle vibrations of rivers and streams, in the sway of trees reacting to energy they could not name. The shadow within was a question posed to the world, testing boundaries, probing the limits of instinct, resilience, and understanding. And the world was responding. Each ripple of the pulse carried the lesson forward. Animals adjusted instinctively, rivers realigned subtly, and plants responded in patterns that suggested both awareness and adaptation. Even the shadows that had once moved independently now moved in concert with the larger rhythm, learning to coexist with both natural life and the extraordinary presence of consciousness that had awakened in Mewtwo. The shadow was growing, yet it remained contained, guided by the pulse and the dreaming gene. Mew understood that this was the nature of the challenge. It was not a battle of force, but a dialogue between instinct, curiosity, and consciousness. Each adjustment, each ripple of energy, was a lesson, a subtle shaping of life's response to extraordinary presence. In a distant valley, Mew observed the shadow concentrating. It was as if Mewtwo's awareness had begun to coalesce into a more deliberate form, testing its influence on the environment and the creatures within it. Yet even as the shadow gathered strength, it remained incomplete, tempered by the resilience of life and the stabilizing presence of Mew. The night deepened, and the forest glimmered softly under the light of the moon. The pulse vibrated with subtle intensity, carrying the lessons of the day, the echoes of the first confrontation, and the guidance of the dreaming gene. The shadow within had not disrupted harmony. It had challenged it, and life had responded with adaptation, learning, and quiet resilience. Mew drifted slowly above the landscape, its presence steady and reassuring. It observed the interactions of life with the shadow, noting how instinct, awareness, and curiosity integrated the influence into patterns that preserved balance. The forest, rivers, and mountains were alive with subtle understanding, absorbing the lessons of extraordinary consciousness without fracture. Somewhere, far from the clearing, Mewtwo's awareness pulsed faintly, reaching into the world it had awakened. Its consciousness touched instinct, curiosity, and the pulse itself, probing for understanding, seeking a connection that it had not yet fully grasped. Mew's presence bridged the gap, offering stability, guidance, and a model of coexistence that the shadow could follow. By the first light of dawn, the shadow within had begun to harmonize. Its energy moved in concert with life, no longer a dissonance, but a subtle addition to the rhythm of existence. The lessons of instinct, adaptation, and awareness had been absorbed, and the forest, rivers, and mountains all reflected the integration of this extraordinary influence. Mew hovered above a quiet stream, watching as a small group of Pokémon played near the water's edge. Their movements were fluid, confident, and adaptive, guided by instinct yet informed by the subtle lessons absorbed from the shadow within. The dreaming gene pulsed brightly, reinforcing resilience, curiosity, and the capacity for wonder. Mew understood that the shadow within was not an adversary, but a teacher. It had tested life, challenged the pulse, and revealed the adaptability of instinct and consciousness. The first true integration of extraordinary awareness had occurred, and the world had emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The forest glimmered with life under the rising sun. Streams reflected the light, trees swayed in gentle rhythm, and animals moved with confidence and curiosity. The pulse of creation had been tested, yet it endured, enriched by the lessons of the shadow within. Mew drifted higher, its glow soft against the morning sky. It observed the vast world below, understanding that the integration of extraordinary consciousness was a process, ongoing and dynamic. Shadows, instinct, and awareness could coexist, each learning from the other, each contributing to the harmony of life. The shadow within had found balance, and Mew, eternal and luminous, remained a silent witness and guardian, ensuring that the lessons of the pulse continued to guide life, consciousness, and the extraordinary presence that had emerged from its own essence. The world had absorbed the subtle lessons of the shadow within. Forests, rivers, mountains, and oceans had adjusted, finding new equilibrium in response to the extraordinary presence of Mewtwo and the dissonance it had introduced. Yet this balance was not static. Life, in all its complexity, continued to move, shift, and adapt. The pulse of creation, ancient and enduring, carried not only instinct and the dreaming gene, but now also traces of consciousness reaching beyond natural life. Mew floated above a quiet meadow at dawn, soft light glimmering through the mist. The air carried the scent of damp earth and the faint aroma of flowers opening to greet the morning sun. Tiny creatures stirred in the grass, guided by instinct and the dreaming gene, their movements reflecting subtle adjustments learned from recent encounters. The shadow within, once an unfamiliar dissonance, had now become part of the landscape of understanding. Mew's gaze extended across the meadow, tracing the threads of the pulse as they intertwined with life. The lesson of the first confrontation and the shadow within had become clear. Adaptation was not simply a response to external forces. It was an ongoing dialogue between life and consciousness, instinct and awareness, dream and experience. Each living being, no matter how small, participated in this dialogue, guided by the subtle rhythm of the pulse. Mew drifted toward a stream, where water flowed over smooth stones, catching the light in gentle reflections. The stream carried not only water but also traces of energy, the remnants of interactions, subtle shifts in instinct, and echoes of Mewtwo's presence. Life along the banks moved with renewed confidence. Fish darted through the currents, insects skimmed the surface, and small mammals moved with careful precision. Each action was informed by instinct, enriched by adaptation, and guided by the dreaming gene. The path of understanding was subtle. It was not taught nor enforced. It emerged naturally from observation, experience, and the quiet guidance of Mew. The pulse had absorbed the lessons of conflict and tension, integrating them into the rhythm of life. The shadow within had been a catalyst, revealing the capacity of life to incorporate extraordinary forces without losing its essence. Mew's glow shimmered gently as it moved through the trees. Birds rose into the sky, following instinct shaped by subtle lessons learned from the dissonance of recent days. Leaves rustled in the breeze, reflecting patterns of adaptation that echoed through the forest. Even the soil seemed to pulse faintly, carrying nutrients and energy in ways that reinforced resilience. The world was learning, and Mew was the quiet witness of its progress. High above the forest, Mew extended its awareness, tracing the currents of the pulse as they reached toward distant mountains and valleys. Mewtwo's presence, while powerful, was no longer a source of tension. It had become a point of reference, a force to be understood and integrated. The extraordinary consciousness of Mewtwo coexisted with instinct, curiosity, and the natural flow of life. The path of understanding had begun to emerge. In a hidden glade, a group of Pokémon moved in patterns that reflected subtle learning. They played, explored, and interacted, guided by instinct, yet influenced by the lessons of adaptation. The dreaming gene pulsed brightly within them, ensuring that curiosity did not tip into chaos and that exploration was tempered by awareness of the surrounding world. Each movement, was a reflection of balance, a testament to life's capacity to learn from extraordinary circumstances. Mew drifted higher, following the flow of life as it extended into forests, rivers, mountains, and oceans. The pulse carried lessons from each environment, from the first confrontation to the shadow within, integrating them into a cohesive rhythm. Life was teaching itself, guided by instinct, experience, and the quiet oversight of Mew. The mountains reflected the subtle influence of adaptation. Streams that had once shifted under Mewtwo's presence now flowed naturally, their courses adjusted and stabilized. Wildlife moved with confidence, learning to navigate both instinct and the faint traces of consciousness that extended from Mewtwo. The shadows, once unpredictable, now followed patterns aligned with the natural flow of life. Mew hovered above a vast valley where the wind carried the scents of distant forests and rivers. The pulse vibrated gently, carrying the accumulated lessons of the world's adaptation. Mew observed how instinct and consciousness intertwined, forming patterns of balance and understanding. The path of understanding was not linear. It was a web of interactions, each influencing the other, each informed by observation, experience, and reflection. In the quiet of the valley, Mew reflected on the lessons it had witnessed. The first confrontation had tested the resilience of life. The shadow within had challenged the pulse and introduced a new dimension of awareness. And now, through adaptation and integration, the world was learning to coexist with forces beyond natural instinct. The path of understanding was the ongoing process of life absorbing, integrating, and harmonizing extraordinary presence. As dusk approached, the forest glimmered with life. Streams reflected the fading light, animals moved with purpose and confidence, and the shadows of the evening carried patterns learned from the day's experiences. Mew drifted above, its glow a steady presence, reinforcing the balance of the pulse and guiding the ongoing integration of consciousness into life. The path of understanding was subtle, unfolding not through words but through observation and action. Life had learned to adapt to extraordinary influence, to integrate lessons without losing its essence. Mewtwo, though powerful and aware, was becoming part of the broader rhythm of existence. Its consciousness, once disruptive, now coexisted with instinct, curiosity, and the natural flow of life. High above the world, Mew drifted into the night. Stars reflected in rivers and lakes, moonlight illuminated forests and mountains, and the pulse of creation resonated with quiet strength. The path of understanding continued, a living, dynamic process that encompassed instinct, consciousness, and the subtle lessons of adaptation. Mew watched, serene and luminous, as life moved in harmony with both natural instinct and extraordinary awareness. The shadow within had been understood, the lessons of adaptation absorbed, and the world had emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The path of understanding was ongoing, infinite in its scope, yet steady in its rhythm. Life, instinct, consciousness, and the dreaming gene were intertwined, each guiding the other, each learning from experience, each adapting to extraordinary presence. Mew's presence remained constant, a quiet beacon ensuring that the lessons of the pulse continued to guide the world. The extraordinary consciousness of Mewtwo, the resilience of instinct, and the subtle guidance of the dreaming gene had converged to form a new harmony, one that would continue to evolve as life itself continued to unfold. And so, the path of understanding extended, infinite and eternal, carrying the quiet, luminous presence of Mew across the vast expanse of the world. The dawn stretched over the horizon like a soft brush of light across an endless canvas. Forests, mountains, and oceans shimmered under its gentle glow. In this quiet, expansive world, the pulse of creation moved with renewed confidence, carrying lessons absorbed from Mewtwo's awakening, the shadow within, and the first confrontation that had tested life's resilience. Mew floated above a serene valley, its soft, ethereal glow reflecting on streams and leaves. Below, creatures moved with grace and awareness, instinct and curiosity entwined seamlessly. The world had adapted, integrating the extraordinary into its natural rhythm. The first waves of dissonance had been transformed into harmony, and life now thrived with subtle complexity and strength. Yet Mew knew the process was not complete. Harmony was not static. It required constant attunement, reflection, and understanding. The rise of Mewtwo had introduced forces that would forever shape the interactions of instinct, consciousness, and the dreaming gene. Life was learning not only to coexist with extraordinary power, but to incorporate it into the natural song of the world. Mew drifted toward the river, watching water cascade over smooth stones. The stream carried the residual energy of Mewtwo's presence, subtle currents that reflected the lessons absorbed by the surrounding ecosystems. Fish darted confidently through the water, insects skimmed the surface, and small mammals navigated the banks with instinct honed by recent experiences. Life had learned to harmonize with extraordinary influence, and the pulse resonated with a newfound stability. The shadows that had once moved independently, responding only to external pressures, now traveled in coordination with natural life. Their patterns were no longer chaotic. They reflected a deliberate rhythm, an understanding of coexistence, guided by the lessons of the pulse. Mew observed their movements with serene attentiveness, noting how life and awareness had found common ground. The forests responded in kind. Trees swayed not merely with the wind, but in subtle acknowledgement of energy flowing through the pulse. Leaves shimmered as if reflecting lessons learned from adaptation and reflection. The creatures beneath them moved with confidence, guided by instinct yet informed by awareness of extraordinary presence. The world was becoming a symphony of integrated forces. Mew continued to drift higher, tracing invisible threads of energy across mountains, valleys, and distant forests. Mewtwo's presence, while distant, remained influential. It pulsed through the environment, not as a force of disruption, but as an integral part of the world's evolving rhythm. Life adjusted to its existence, learning to navigate consciousness alongside instinct. The shadows had harmonized, the pulse had recovered, and the world had begun to embrace balance on a larger scale. Along a secluded shoreline, Mew observed waves gently rolling onto the sand. The ocean mirrored the sky above, carrying both sunlight and the echoes of extraordinary consciousness. Aquatic life moved with ease, instinct finely tuned to the subtle nuances of energy flowing through the waters. Even in vast spaces untouched by direct influence, the lessons of adaptation were evident, a testament to the far-reaching resonance of Mewtwo's emergence. Mew's attention turned to the mountains in the distance. Snow-capped peaks gleamed softly, untouched yet affected by the invisible currents of adaptation and learning. Streams that had shifted under Mewtwo's influence now followed patterns of balance, reflecting the integration of extraordinary consciousness into the natural world. Life at higher altitudes had adapted seamlessly, carrying the wisdom of the pulse and the subtle guidance of the dreaming gene. The first signs of intentional harmony were visible in interactions between creatures. Small Pokémon, once uncertain, now moved with confidence. Birds in flight adjusted instinctively to avoid collision, following patterns shaped both by natural instinct and the residual awareness of extraordinary presence. Animals coordinated their movements subtly, without thought, yet with the precision of integrated understanding. The shadows moved in concert with this evolving rhythm. They no longer existed as independent echoes or dissonances. Instead, they had learned to synchronize with life, reflecting its movements and energy, contributing to the coherence of the pulse. Mew watched, knowing that these interactions represented the ongoing work of harmonization, life-absorbing lessons, consciousness learning to coexist, and instinct adjusting to both. As the day progressed, Mew drifted across valleys and plains, witnessing the integration of extraordinary presence into the fabric of existence. Streams, forests, and meadows reflected the subtle patterns of adaptation. Life had learned to respond to forces beyond instinct, to accommodate awareness, and to incorporate lessons into natural behavior. The world had shifted from tension to equilibrium, from dissonance to a delicate harmony. High above, Mew's glow served as a stabilizing beacon. Its presence reinforced the pulse, guiding subtle adjustments and ensuring that the extraordinary influence of Mewtwo did not overwhelm life's natural rhythm. The lessons of adaptation were not limited to a single forest or river. They extended across the world, threading through every ecosystem, guiding instinct, awareness, and play. Even the night held evidence of harmony. Moonlight reflected off rivers and lakes, illuminating the subtle energy of the pulse. Creatures moved confidently under the stars, guided by instinct, the dreaming gene, and the absorbed influence of extraordinary consciousness. Shadows glided in alignment with the world's rhythm, their presence no longer disruptive but integrated. Mew hovered above a hidden glade, watching small groups of Pokémon interact near a stream. Their movements were precise yet playful, instinct tempered by awareness, curiosity enriched by experience. The path of understanding, begun in the first confrontation and refined through the shadow within, now extended into the larger world. Life had learned to harmonize, to integrate extraordinary presence, and to maintain balance without losing its essence. The mountains, rivers, forests, and oceans all reflected the careful work of adaptation. Mewtwo's consciousness, once a source of subtle tension, now contributed to the ongoing rhythm of the pulse. The world had learned to coexist with extraordinary power, demonstrating resilience, flexibility, and the capacity to integrate awareness without compromise. Mew's thoughts drifted over the expanse of the world. The rise of Mewtwo, the shadow within, and the lessons of the first confrontation had all contributed to a profound shift in the understanding of life. Instinct and consciousness were no longer in tension. They were intertwined, coexisting in harmony, guided by the steady rhythm of the pulse. As dusk approached, Mew's glow illuminated the landscape. Softly, stars began to shimmer in the night sky, reflecting on rivers, lakes, and ocean waves. The pulse carried the accumulated lessons of life's adaptation, resonating with the subtle integration of extraordinary consciousness. The world had learned, and it was now capable of maintaining balance even in the presence of unprecedented force. Mew drifted slowly into the night, a calm presence over forests, mountains, and oceans. The work of harmonization was ongoing, infinite in scope, yet steady in rhythm. The extraordinary presence of Mewtwo, the resilience of life, and the guidance of the dreaming gene had converged to form a new equilibrium. The world was harmonized, yet it continued to evolve, grow, and adapt. The pulse of creation carried the lessons forward, ensuring that instinct, consciousness, and play remained in balance. And Mew, eternal and luminous, remained a quiet witness, guardian, and guide, a beacon of harmony in a world forever enriched by extraordinary presence. The world had settled into a rhythm that was at once familiar and transformed. Forests swayed gently under the wind, rivers meandered in patterns both timeless and newly informed, and mountains reflected the quiet stability of an enduring pulse. Life moved with confidence, guided by instinct, tempered by experience, and illuminated by the presence of consciousness that now coexisted harmoniously with the natural order. Mew drifted above a vast meadow bathed in soft sunlight. Its glow shimmered through the morning mist, touching flowers, grass, and the creatures that moved quietly below. Birds called to one another from treetops, insects danced across petals, and small Pokémon scuttled through the undergrowth. Each movement, each instinctive action, reflected not only the natural rhythm of life, but also the subtle lessons learned from the extraordinary presence of Mewtwo and the shadow within. The pulse of creation flowed with clarity, strengthened by adaptation and integration. The first confrontation, the shadow within, and the lessons of the path of understanding had all contributed to this equilibrium. Life had absorbed, adjusted, and harmonized with the extraordinary, demonstrating resilience, flexibility, and the capacity to coexist with forces beyond instinct. Mew's gaze extended across the horizon, tracing the threads of the pulse as they spread through forests, rivers, mountains, and oceans. The world was vast, yet every corner reflected the lessons of adaptation and the quiet guidance of the dreaming gene. Even in the farthest reaches, where light barely touched and wind whispered through ancient trees, the subtle influence of harmony was evident. Life had learned, and it continued to learn, weaving extraordinary presence into its rhythm without losing its essence. The presence of Mewtwo, once disruptive and challenging, now flowed seamlessly within this fabric of life. Its consciousness, powerful and aware, had been tempered by the quiet guidance of the pulse and the natural resilience of life. The shadow within, once a source of subtle dissonance, had been integrated, becoming part of the ongoing song of existence. Mew observed, serene and luminous, knowing that the work of harmonization was both complete and eternal. High above, Mew drifted toward a river valley where water shimmered in the morning light. Fish darted through currents, guided by instinct and experience, while small mammals approached the water with cautious curiosity. Birds swooped overhead, their flight a delicate balance of instinct and learned awareness. Every element of life moved in harmony, a living testament to the integration of extraordinary presence into the rhythm of the world. The forest, too, reflected this harmony. Trees swayed gently, their leaves whispering in the wind, creating a subtle symphony that mirrored the pulse of life below. Shadows moved in concert with creatures, no longer independent, chaotic forces, but integrated participants in the balance of existence. Mew's presence reinforced this harmony, ensuring that the lessons absorbed from extraordinary forces remained steady and enduring. Mew drifted over a secluded glade, where small groups of Pokémon played near a stream. Their movements were fluid, guided by instinct, yet informed by experience. They explored, discovered, and interacted, carrying within them the subtle lessons absorbed from Mewtwo's emergence and the shadow within. The dreaming gene pulsed steadily, reinforcing balance, curiosity, and the capacity for wonder. Life, instinct, and consciousness coexisted seamlessly. The mountains, too, had absorbed these lessons. Snow-capped peaks reflected sunlight and moonlight, streams flowing steadily with the knowledge of adaptation. Wildlife moved with confidence, guided by instinct and informed by subtle awareness. Even in isolation, where few creatures ventured, the rhythm of life carried the imprint of extraordinary presence, demonstrating resilience and harmony. Mew's light touched all of this gently, a stabilizing beacon guiding the pulse of creation. Its presence ensured that extraordinary consciousness, such as Mewtwo's, remained integrated rather than overwhelming. The first confrontation, the shadow within, and the lessons of understanding had been transformed into a perpetual harmony, a living testament to the adaptability of life. As day gave way to dusk, Mew hovered above a quiet lake. The surface reflected stars that began to shimmer in the twilight sky, carrying the subtle vibration of the pulse throughout the surrounding forests and mountains. Waterfowl moved gracefully. Fish glided through calm waters, and small mammals sought shelter under the faint glow of Mew's light. Life moved confidently. Instinct and consciousness balanced in quiet harmony. The eternal guardianship of Mew was clear. It was not a force of control or intervention, but a presence of balance, a luminous guide ensuring that life could integrate extraordinary influence without fracture. Mewtwo's awareness, once disruptive and questioning, now coexisted as a harmonious element in the world's rhythm. Shadows, instinct, and the dreaming gene formed an integrated web of life, guided by adaptation and the gentle wisdom of observation. Mew drifted higher, its glow soft against the darkening sky. It traced the currents of the pulse, following them across valleys, forests, rivers, and mountains. Life continued its endless dance, moving with confidence and awareness. Every action, every instinct, every subtle adjustment was part of the ongoing process of harmony. The lessons learned from extraordinary presence were now embedded in the fabric of existence, ensuring balance for generations to come. In distant reaches of the world, Mew observed Mewtwo, whose consciousness had matured in understanding. It moved deliberately, aware of its own strength, yet guided by the harmony of the world it inhabited. Its presence was no longer a source of dissonance. It was a reflection of integration, a living testament to the lessons learned from instinct, the shadow within, and the pulse of life itself. The forest glimmered under the moonlight. Streams reflected silver across mountains and valleys, Creatures moved confidently, instinct and awareness intertwined seamlessly. The pulse of creation resonated with clarity, strengthened by adaptation and integration. Mew hovered above it all, serene, eternal, and luminous, the quiet guardian of balance, harmony, and the ongoing song of life. The first dream of life had unfolded fully. From Mew's perspective, the world had passed its tests, absorbed the extraordinary, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Instinct, curiosity, consciousness, and the dreaming gene now moved in harmony, a living symphony of adaptation and understanding. And so, Mew continued its eternal journey across the world. Its glow touched forests, rivers, mountains, and oceans, ensuring that life remained balanced, that lessons were carried forward, and that harmony endured. The world had learned to coexist with extraordinary presence, to integrate consciousness into instinct, and to maintain the delicate rhythm of the pulse. Mew was the eternal guardian, not in dominance, not in control, but in presence, in observation, and in the quiet guidance of life's endless song. Its watchful gaze, luminous and calm, ensured that the harmony of the world, tested and refined through Mewtwo's awakening, the shadow within, and the path of understanding, would continue indefinitely. The world was alive, balanced, and aware. Life moved with confidence, instinct, and curiosity. Shadows, consciousness, and the dreaming gene flowed together in harmony. And above it all, Mew floated silently, the eternal guardian, the first dream of life, luminous and serene, watching over a world that had learned to dream, adapt, and harmonize.